Hello, everybody. It is Friday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Joined for my weekly chat with Paul Zeise, our Post-Gazette sports columnist here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Paul, we got a lot to get into this week. We're going to be talking about the Steelers cornerback situation. Why are these veterans never working out for them? Why can they not seem to develop their own younger guys? What is Mike Tomlin's role in all of that? We're also going to talk about the tough remaining schedule that the Steelers have to face with games against the Colts, Lions, Bills, Ravens, Chargers, all these good teams that they're now going to face over the next handful of weeks. Can they beat enough of them to make the NFL playoffs? We're going to dig into all of that. Before we do, we want to remind you that this show is presented by FanDuel. We also want to thank our sponsor, Edgar, Snyder & Associates. When you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment is over? Who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. Insurance company doctors do. How does that make you feel? If the answer is not great, call Edgar, Snyder & Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. They'll fight for the work comp rights you deserve. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Paul, this is something I was dwelling on the last couple of days as Darius Slay and Jalen Ramsey have sort of become the next group of veteran Steelers cornerbacks to not work out. Is Mike Tomlin too driven, resume driven as a coach? Because anytime he gets asked about these guys, anytime he gets asked about Aaron Rodgers, any of these veteran guys, he always says, well, look at the resume. That's why I want them. And it's like he's followed these guys throughout their careers, and he wanted to have them on his team. And then when they're in their mid-30s, that's the time that he jumps on them, says, bring them in here. And then they consistently struggle. It's not just these guys. Patrick Peterson, Donte Jackson. You can go back through guys on the offensive side of the ball too, but I think we're kind of focusing on corner here because it just seems to be a persistent problem of getting these old guys who end up not being able to play. What's your read on the dynamic there, and whether he's become too much of the NFL establishment, the insider, the guy who knows too many people and just wants to fill out his roster with what he feels are proven commodities, even if that doesn't match their current ability level?
Well, the thing that you said at the start of all this is probably the most troublesome thing of this, is the fact that he feels like he needs to go out and get these guys because they're horrible at developing corners. They've been really bad. It's one of the greatest questions I have is that this is a guy who is supposed to be a secondary guy. Wasn't that his roots way back when he was in Tampa? That was his roots, was the secondary. And if you think about the guys that he's drafted over the years, I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to come up with more than two or one or two that have developed into an actual player. And so that is where you start. It's why are they so bad at developing corners? And actually, why are they so bad at identifying corners, apparently, and identifying guys who can play that position and then, developing them. Now, as for this thing of where he goes out and signs all these guys and does often talk way too much about their resumes, I'm not sure why he does that other than it's sort of his default, I mean, he's trying basically to say, hey, we're signing good players. You look at their resume, they're good players. But I agree with you 100%. He's way too enamored with what guys have done 5 years ago or 6 years ago, as opposed to what they're capable of doing now. And I think Jalen Ramsey is the poster child for that, honestly. I mean, obviously, he's a really, great career. He's probably still what I would classify as a good player, but he's nowhere near the player that, they think that they thought they were getting, or at least they were trying to sell that they were getting. And as a result, if you think about it, he's a guy who they have to really consider, rethink completely how they're going to use him and utilize him and how they're going to basically make sure that they protect him in so many ways. So to me, I think it's one of those things where, his what you would call enamored, being enamored by people's resume is absolutely a problem because it blinds him to the fact that some of these guys just aren't any good anymore.
Well, which one's the root of the? Well, I think it's a chicken or the egg situation here, Paul. Is the problem that they can't develop the young cornerbacks, or is the problem that they're not willing to go through the lumps of doing that, and they always have to go out and find these band-aids because that's what Mike Tomlin's reflex is to do? I tend to think it's the latter. I think he wants to have these guys that he's seen in his 18 years as an NFL head coach and says, I want that guy. I want that guy. I'm not patient enough to wait for this guy or that guy to pan out. I think that's more the root of the problem than the development. I think that they haven't created a great environment to develop those guys in.
No, I agree. But like I said, I mean, I think if you look at some of the guys that they've drafted, I mean, is it a problem of, they're drafting guys who might not be good enough? I mean, you look at Artie Burns, for instance. I mean, he clearly just wasn't good. But one of the things that Mike Tomlin's enamored with, he is enamored with names and he's enamored with resumes. But the other thing he's enamored with, Adam, is athleticism and length. He loves those really long guys who are athletic, the guys with some length that are athletic, that it doesn't matter if they can't play a lick. He loves those guys. Those are the guys he wants as his corners. And so when it comes to, these things where you bring in guys, I think sometimes he's brought in guys who just aren't that good. And that, then you're right. He decides, I need to go out and go get some veterans. And the veterans that he has signed, it's almost like he is willing to be the last guy on all of these guys' or the last team on all these guys' resumes, because he never signs a corner who's like in their prime and really capable of giving you 5 or 6 good years.
And like a guy who maybe doesn't have a huge name but still has that ability compared to these big names. Someone in their late 20s, something like that. They never sign that type of guy. It's always the guys in their 30s that them from some point in the past. And in my experience, a lot of the best corners in the NFL, I only hear about them when they're shutting down the Steelers or something. They don't always have the biggest names. They're known in their in their respective cities, but maybe they don't have the same national profile as some of these guys that Mike Tomlin likes to go get. Paul, I want to ask specifically about Joey Porter Jr. and whether his name has helped him or hurt him in his development. Maybe helped him in the sense that it's made his presence on this roster has made him harder to move on from for Mike Tomlin. He's got to find a place for him because his name is Joey Porter Jr. and not something else. Or has it hurt him in, that he is just kind of projectable, but maybe the expectations were too high from him at the very beginning?
Well, I think the one thing is when you look at Joey Porter Jr., I think you're right. It's a double-edged sword because if he was named Joey Smith, actually, if his name was Joey Smith or something, he probably wouldn't have been drafted by the Steelers as high as he did. He was. Clearly, Mike Tomlin's relationship with his dad had something to do with that. But I also think that because that's his name, there's a standard that people, want to measure him against his dad all the time, and his dad, was obviously a really, really good team and a really important part of that team, a really good player on that team, an important part of, some really great teams. But Joey Porter Jr.'s, the problem the Steelers have is they don't really have an alternative, do they? I mean, it's slim pickings when we talked a little bit about this in the preseason, you and I. I mean, you and I were two people that were talking about the lack of a second receiver and also the fact that if you looked at the corners, we better hope that they all stay healthy because once you get past, 2 or 3, and actually we were counting Darius Slay, which it's actually now, where you get past 1, there's a lot of questions. So I think that obviously, Joey Porter Jr.'s name probably, puts a little bit more of a target on its back than needs to be. But by the same token, you know what? He was drafted pretty high. He was brought in. He was made a starter almost immediately. the expectation should be high. I just think Mike Tomlin right now is in a situation where there's nothing he can do because I don't know that he has any alternate.
Yeah, and it's, I don't want to say that he didn't. I thought he was going to get drafted on day one in that draft. So I think the Steelers got him in a good spot. So it's hard for me to fault the draft pick. But I think he's just a very interesting nexus of this conversation of Mike Tomlin and the personal and the resumes and the NFL insider element of him, and his ability to evaluate talent. And I mean, there's guys in that draft they could have traded up to get. We talked about, a bunch of them on the podcast that ended up going ahead of Joey Porter Jr. and have gone on to, I think, make bigger names for themselves. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. Let's get out of this segment on this, Paul. How aggressively would you attempt to remake this group at the NFL trade deadline? Send guys out, bring guys in. I think there's been some reports saying that Darius Slay Jr. could be dealt because of his inability so far. Can you fix this on the fly, or are what they're going to be? When the baseline production is so low, and you're next to last, third from the bottom in terms of yardage allowed. To me, that just seems like too big of a hill to climb. With a couple of deals.
Well, here's my question to you, Adam. And I was reading this about Darius Slay. Can you ever tell me a time in history when this guy is not playing good, this guy stinks, so we're going to trade him and get something for him? Like, who's going to give you anything for Darius Slay? I guess if there's a team that, is desperate for a corner, any corner, you might get a 6th or 7th round pick for him. But I think if you look at who is available, they are what they are. I mean, I know they just signed, a safety, but what's his name? Duggar. Is it Cal Duggar?
Cal Duggar, yeah.
Cal Duggar. They just signed Cal Duggar yesterday. I mean, I guess he's given some depth and all that other stuff, but those are the kind of guys that are going to be available. I don't know who you're going to go get to remake the secondary in a way that it needs to be remade. Because honestly, if we're being truthful, you need to be able to move Joey Porter from being the second corner to being the fourth corner. In other words, being the guy that gives the two starting corners a break for a series or two. You need to find a slot receiver, a slot corner, and I don't know that guy is there. So you need help. And I just don't know that it's realistic that there's going to be a bunch of teams lining up to trade you the kind of players that you need. I mean, I'm sure you can go find guys who are a little bit cast-offs, but this is the one thing I was going to ask you about. Do you, and this goes to your point about him being enamored with resumes and all that other stuff. The Steelers' defense is slowly but surely becoming sort of the cast of misfit parts, isn't it? If you think about the guys that they have on defense, they're trying to win with a number of guys that are sort of, and I would even count Patrick Queen in that. I mean, I think what we've seen over the last year and a half is why Baltimore was so quick and easy to say, we're going to let him go. That's the danger you run if you start trying to even remake things even more.
Yeah, and if you start making desperation moves with a team that, I think you could plug the best corner in the NFL into this group, and I think you'd still have weaknesses all over the field. And obviously that deal is not available. So it just does seem like a tall mountain to climb in doing stuff in midseason, because NFL trades are just not that common, Paul, compared to other sports, right? Like MLB, the trade deadline, we do a live stream, we sit down because the deals fly. NHL is a similar situation. You see it sometimes in the NBA. The NFL, I think teams have been making more trades, but they don't address massive problems midseason by and large. It's usually you get one guy, you get two guys, maybe things change, but you're not wholesale remaking units, and I don't think that's possible for this team, unfortunately for them. Paul, we're going to get into the Steelers schedule here in the next segment. We're going to talk about whether this team still has the chance to make the playoffs as the schedule has gotten more difficult than expected. So make sure you stay tuned. We'll be right back. We are back on the North Shore Drive podcast talking Steelers schedule. Before we get started there, we want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci, Pittsburgh's mesothelioma and asbestos attorney, standing up for victims of mesothelioma and asbestos cancers with over 85 years of experience. Visit them online at sdklaw.com. We also want to thank Olivia Numismatic Rarities. Gold prices are through the roof, and there's never been a better time to cash in. At Olivia Numismatic Rarities in Shadyside, you can turn your unwanted gold into instant cash safely, securely, and with full transparency. Bring your old jewelry, coins, or bullion to get top dollar from Pittsburgh's most trusted gold buyer. Visit onrcoins.com or stop by 5833 Ellsworth Avenue today. Paul, has this schedule become too tough for the Steelers to have a realistic wild card hope? Is it kind of division or bust here with games against Indy, the Chargers, Buffalo, Detroit, and then you got the 2 against Baltimore? I think they can still win the division to make the playoffs with the lead they have against Baltimore, and the fact that Baltimore hasn't really proven any consistency yet. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll be that team that we saw late last season, but to this point, they still have a lot to prove. So I'm willing to say that they can still win the division. But if they don't win the division, it seems increasingly hard for me to imagine them slipping in, to the back end of the AFC playoff field, because there are a lot of good teams that are going to be in that mix.
Well, I think one of the things is if you look at their next 3 games, I think it'll tell us a whole lot. I think they cannot go 0-3. I assume they probably beat the Bengals here, but after watching the first game between the 2 teams, it's not a sure thing. But to me, if you lose to the Colts, then you lose to the Chargers, those are teams that you might have, tiebreaker issues with. You did beat New England, which helps. Because that's, but again, I think the Patriots are going to be a team that probably are going to finish ahead of the Steelers numbers wise. One thing we've seen with this team under Mike Tomlin is right about the time everybody writes them off and says they're done, this is going to be his first losing season and all that other stuff, he finds a way to rally the troops and they find a way to win games. Now, the one year where they were 2-6 to start the season, if you remember, down the stretch, they rallied and finished 9-8. But down the stretch, they literally played every backup quarterback they could possibly play. And they had a very favorable schedule in terms of that. This is going to require some heavy lifting. And Adam, I think when we're watching this defense, if they don't figure some things out, I can look at the schedule and say Indianapolis, the Chargers, Buffalo, Baltimore twice, the Bengals, Detroit, all those teams are going to light this team up. So if they're going to win games, they're going to have to figure out a way maybe to outscore some of these teams. And that's going to require them to maybe Mike Tomlin do something he never does and never wants to do. And that is basically just say to Aaron Rodgers, you know what? Air it out, baby. Let's try and win the game. And I don't know that he's built that way. He's a guy that really believes in the whole idea that you can, win with defense and all that other good stuff. I'm just telling you, I look at this schedule and I say if they're going to continue to do the things they do and be stubborn and say, well, this is how we play, we're going to go here, we're going to, try and win with the defense and kicking game and let the offense just score enough to win. I look at their schedule and say, I don't see how they're going to have enough firepower to survive that schedule. But again, we've seen Mike Tomlin rally. They do have, a game against the Browns, a game against the Bears. I mean, they do have a couple of games that, they have a shot to win if they just play well. That gets them to 6 or 7 wins. And at that point, you know what? You only need to win 1 or 2 of those games against the best teams on your schedule. I don't think it's easy, but I do think that if you look at it realistically, they have a lot of work to do, and they probably are going to have to change their philosophy and change the way they play and what they think if they're going to win.
Our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook have the Steelers at -150 to miss the playoffs. So their answer to this conversation is no. It's not going to happen for this group. So they are going to have to do things that the wise guys are not expecting them to do. Paul, which of those teams that I mentioned, Indy, the Chargers, Buffalo, Detroit, and Baltimore, do you think they have the best chance of beating? And I'm going to assume that Lamar Jackson is healthy, somewhat close to 100% with the Ravens. I think if he's not in there, obviously you would say the Ravens is the team you'd have the best chance to beat. But if he's in there, which team do you like their chances against most?
Well, I tell you, I might be crazy here, but I actually have a feeling they're going to beat the Colts. Don't ask me why, but it's the kind of game that Mike Tomlin. Here's the other thing. I know you're a numbers guy, an analytics guy, and you go through a lot of different, ways that you evaluate things. And, you hate when people say, I'm going to use my gut. But this just feels like the kind of game that Mike Tomlin wins. It just does. Everybody's turned on him. Everybody's down on the Steelers. Everybody's, fire him, fire his coaches. They're incompetent and all that other stuff. And he somehow rallies the troops and they go out and they win this game. Now, matchup-wise, obviously Baltimore, even with Lamar Jackson, the one thing they've proven over the years is they can beat Baltimore, and that they match up well with that offense for whatever reason. They're good. They're good at stopping that offense. They're good at limiting what Lamar Jackson does, except for last year in the playoffs. But for the most part, that's probably a good matchup. I don't like the Chargers matchup as much, just because I think the Chargers will be fully healthy on their offensive line by next week, and if they are, they want to punish the other team and run the ball down their throats. That could be a long afternoon for the Steelers. So I actually think I think they have no chance of beating the Lions, by the way. But I think that it's really kind of funny to me. But I kind of feel like the Colts. It just feels like Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones, sooner or later is going to have one of those games where he wakes up and remembers he's Daniel Jones. I know Shane Steichen has had, been really masterful at beating Mike Tomlin's defense, but I don't know. Adam, I'm going to go out on a limb and just say I have no physical or analytical evidence to suggest this, but I believe that the Steelers will go out and play really well against the Colts and probably beat them.
Well, and I think the Colts are somewhat in the same category as the Steelers. You got to see them do it against the best teams in the NFL before you feel like this is legit, right? Like we saw the Steelers run out to 10-3 last season. We've seen them jump out there. There are teams every year in the AFC that present themselves as, a possible challenger to these teams with better quarterbacks and more playoff success, and then things fade. So, in that sense, I feel like the Colts have more to prove in this game than the Steelers do. Right. Would you agree with that, Paul?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think the thing about the Colts, everybody is basically in the same exact position I think I am with the Colts, and that is, are we really trusting Danny Dimes? Are we really trusting that he is this guy that we're seeing that's an MVP candidate right now? Boy, I have a hard time until I see him do it for a whole year. I just have a hard time, going that route. You know what I'm saying? And so I think a lot of people are waiting for that game where he just kind of blows up and, doesn't play very well.
Yeah, he certainly has that history. But, as we're starting to see, Paul, around the NFL, you move some of these quarterbacks around into better situations, and they have success. Sam Darnold, I think, is in that category. Baker Mayfield, we talked about them with the same kind of suspicion, I think, at different points in time, and they've found better homes. They've bounced around, but it does seem like the dawn of the 30-something journeyman quarterback is upon us in the NFL, and Maybe Daniel Jones is going to etch his name, in that lore next, but there is still a long way to go. But Paul, thank you for joining me this week. If you're just joining us for the first time, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you don't miss anything coming your way. Paul and I will be back again on Sunday with the post-game show. Chris Carter, Brian Bacco will also be back with the Saturday episode of the North Shore Drive. So lots coming your way. Subscribe there. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. And please consider a subscription to post-gazette.com, where all of our award-winning written coverage can be found. We appreciate your support, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.